Good morning, and thanks for joining us here on Condo Solutions. Every Monday morning from 9 to 10 o'clock, we talk about things that affect you in your condominium association or in your homeowners association. Some of the things that you may have questions about or have concerns, or maybe just want some education. You may not be familiar with the laws in Florida relative to condos and HOAs, and we're here to help you with that. We've been doing that for about 20 years or so, and it's completely free to you, and it's a community service program, so you can call in. Many of you have the numbers, and know the number, but I'll give it to you anyway. 772-220-9788. Again, that's 772-220-9788, which is also 772-220-WSTU, if you remember the letters better than the numbers. My name is Mark Breckbill. I'm a CPA and a licensed community association manager, and have been practicing here on the Treasure Coast and really in the state of Florida now for about 25 years or 30 years at this point. Along with us and co-hosting the show, and always here and really the star. I try not to really pump him up too much because his ego, it just get to be so big, but the star of the show is Peter Mullengarden. Peter is an attorney who's been doing this since Moses. He's that old, and he's been doing and when it comes to condo law and it comes to HOA law, you can't beat it. Peter has got a lot of expertise and a lot of practical experience, and that's why I know many of you listen and call in, because he's got that kind of experience. So he's here, and you can call him, and he'll be glad to take your question. A couple ground rules on the questions, just as we always give them every week. But first of all, we need a name. We don't need your name. Evan doesn't track you down. He's not going to, write your number, and we're not going to search you for the condo police afterwards. So don't worry about that. But we do need something to call you. So give us a name, and it can be your name. We're not, but we will. We don't need your association. In fact, we prefer we don't have it, because a lot of the information we're going to provide applies to a number of different associations. Some have very similar, if not exactly the same problems. And if people hear an association, they sometimes kind of tune out a little bit, thinking, "Oh, that doesn't apply to me." So, for that reason, we don't need the association. The other big issue that we always talk about is that we don't have your documents. So we're going to give you the best answer we can, the best legal answer based on statute, based on court cases, based on common practice, rules and regulations, all of those kind of things. But we're also going to we also don't have your documents, so we can't give you a hard and fast answer for your association. And so if you're in a position that you're looking to go to court, or you're maybe need to get some legal advice, then you can contact Peter directly and sit down with him, and he'll look at your documents and be able to give you some assistance going forward as to how you can handle it and what the situation is. So for that reason, we will also, when we take your question, we ask that you be a little bit patient, because we will sometimes talk a little broader than your particular problem, just because we want to maybe hit some similar problems that are out there that maybe not be exactly the same, but are very close. So anyway, that's the ground rules. That's the only rules. And other than that, it's fair game. So 772-220-9788. Good morning, Peter. How are you doing?
Good morning, Mark. I'm well. How are you?
Good. Glad to be here. It's a little cold, but I'm surviving. So I later in the show, if you don't hear from me for a little while, it's probably because I've beat up Evan and taken his jacket. If it gets any colder in here, it's it is AM radio. They can't afford heat, and so we're kind of keeping the temperature down. So, but anyway, no, it's good. We're good here in the studio. So, but it's good. Glad you had a good weekend and everything's ready to go. And we got our first caller this morning. Marty, go ahead.
Hey, good morning, guys.
Good morning,
Marty Jacobson.
Oh, hey, Marty. I didn't know it was you, so I would have got you on sooner. Go ahead.
No, it's fine. I'm with Seniors versus Crime. We're a special project of the Florida Attorney General's office. You are mentioning there the condo police. When people, and they do make several complaints against their condo associations and issues such as that, and that's an exemption that we have to refer to the Florida Condominium Ombudsman online, or I refer them to your show and your guest because that's a statutory exemption. But we do get a lot of internal complaints about HOAs and condominiums and how they run their boards and what their charges are and fraud within the organization allegedly. But we are polite and we refer them, like I said, to the ombudsman or your show or your guest.
Well, we appreciate that, Marty, and I know you've been helping out in that area. In fact, I know you've come on the show previously and given our listeners an update on some things that were going on, and when we had issues going on, some things with scams and things like that, you've provided some information, and we welcome that. That's another benefit of the program is we like to try to get that information out there. But so why I got you on, Marty, just as one of the things that always happens in associations, everybody always is claiming, the previous guys committed fraud. They were stealing, they were doing this, they were doing that. What actually, what do you guys do in those kind of situations? You just primarily referred out, or do you guys, is there any investigation that takes place, or what happens?
No, there's been investigation. We look at the complaint, and then we find that there's probable cause in their complaint. We would refer it to the most appropriate law enforcement agency. But again, sometimes the things don't rise to that level, and there's simply issues to be debated. So we get the ombudsman involved. But there are cases, and you bring them up in an article in the paper as well, and we try to find the best resolution for their problem.
Yeah, it's funny because it is a. I know we've been really kind of fortunate here. We had a fairly large fraud. I don't know. It's been years ago now, probably 2000 or somewhere in that, maybe even before that. But that was the last, that was a big property management fraud, but that was the last, real big thing that we had. We had a couple minor things, but I know down south, where Peter's at, and really a lot further south down into Broward, they've had a lot of, they've had a number of issues with that kind of thing. So it's good to know.
Let me share with you that one of the big things that we get is contractor fraud within the HOA. A lot of people venture outside their HOA, and many of them have established contractors that have already been vetted and approved, plumbers, electricians, et cetera, to do work. Mm-hmm. And they always think they're going to get a better deal. They go outside, and then the job falls apart, and then they're in violation of their HOA guidelines because they can't get work done, and it's unsightly, or the contractor left the job. So that's something that we do deal with, is the contractor fraud. But if people would abide by their HOAs, probably they could avoid some of these scams.
Yeah. Well, that's a good point. I didn't think about that, but that's, those kind of deals. And we haven't had one for a while, but when the hurricanes came in and we had, all those out of state roofers for a while, that was a real problem. They were.
I have hundreds of them: roofing, tile jobs, cabinetry, plumbing, you name it. They just think they're going to get a better job, and they hire a handyman rather than a licensed contractor who's not even accepted by the board, and then things fall apart.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, it's a good point, and that's a good thing for our listeners to be aware of, that a lot of that's out there, and you're going to get stuck holding the bag. That's happened before, and you end up paying for something twice, or not getting the job done right. So that's a good point. Well, we appreciate your support for the show, Marty, and we appreciate all the things you do. And anytime you want to call in and let us know about something that's going on, or if there's anything you want to help us with. Of course, a lot of people that live in condos and homeowners associations, but especially condos, a lot of them are seniors. So a lot of the information that you get out there is helpful to.
Let me give you our toll-free number.
Okay.
Seniors versus Crime, 1-800-203-3099, or www.seniorsvscrime.com. And thank you guys very much. You're a good resource for our organization.
Thanks, Marty. Appreciate the call.
Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, Marty Jacobson. Many of you know Marty. He's really been a real force in the community in terms of getting information out, communications for the sheriff's department. I think for a long time, the police, or was it, maybe it was the Stewart Police, but I lose track of that. But Marty's been in here giving information out and helping out with getting things done in the community, both for the police and also now with other things that are going on in the community. Has been a real resource to our community. So appreciate your call, Marty. And the so that's a good thing to talk about a little bit, Peter. Is that not just individual contractor fraud, but I think we're going to be looking at some issues with building codes and with construction and who's authorized to do construction. I think probably that's going to tighten up even more in terms of who's allowed to do certain types of work in a community, what kind of licenses they have to have. And, some associations in the past kind of looked the other way when people were doing work in there, maybe bringing somebody in the unit and they knew they might not be licensed, but they were letting them, do some work. We may see some of that be more highly regulated now with Champlain and some of the issues that happened there. What's your thoughts on that, Peter?
I think that is a distinct possibility. I'm also think you may see, with everyone going through certifications, because the state is proposing their own certification law in this session. Some towns and cities have already adopted their own. I think one thing you might see is just people scrambling for contractors. If everyone is out there, getting and engineers. Will that, sort of like when they're scrambling after the hurricane, I don't think it'd be quite the same thing, but I think there's going to be issues with, finding, good licensed people to do your work, under all these new laws. I haven't heard about whether they're going to be, tightening up the actual licensing requirements for the contractors. I haven't heard that, but I think it's, a possibility that they, as you mentioned, that might be part of this, but I haven't seen that yet.
It's interesting. That's a good point. That it is interesting that we have a lot of people don't really realize it even, but we have two. We talk about general contractors or contractors, but in Florida we have GCs and RCs, and we have a general contractor, a general contracting license. They're pretty much able to do any kind of they're licensed to do any kind of construction, whether it's commercial, multi-story, residential, whatever. They can do. They can do any of those kind of things, and they can come in and do a 20-story high rise if they want. But an RC, a residential contractor, basically is limited in terms of what they can do. They can do residential generally up to 4 stories, I think it is. But I know they can't go over 4. It might even be only 3, but I think it's 4 stories that they're allowed to do. And they have to be, and it can be commercial under that or residential, but there's limitations. So some associations are going to find that they've been using a contractor, but it's possible that contractor may not have been, may not be authorized on their construction, on the type of construction they're doing, depending upon what they're doing. And so it is something that is going to potentially change coming forward. And we're going to have to, we'll keep an eye on that. But I think there's going to be some restrictions there. I'm not, I'm not sure I favor state standards, for all of this, because the communities are different, and there's a lot of different issues. And like you say, I think some of this stuff is going to be impossible. Engineers, for example, the associations I've got that have had reserve studies done, those reserve studies almost always are not done by engineers. They're done by reserve specialists. And we're going to see if we're going to potentially see a change to that. If we do, those things are going to go up. The cost of those, it used to be that a reserve study would run you, maybe around $4,000 or $5,000, and then they would update it for another grand or something like that every so often, and that was about it. But now I'm hearing numbers in the $15,000 range, and and somewhere in that, and that's going to be tough. There's going to be some pushback because of the cost going up, but there's just not that many structural engineers that are available to do that kind of work. So it's going to, I think, push the availability out. So some of this stuff has got to be phased in from the point that, you just can't accomplish it. It's, you're not going to be able to hire people. You're going to have to schedule them out, and it's going to take a while. So I don't know, Peter. I think it's it's right that I think they're right in doing in making associations do some of these kind of things. I'm just not sure, who should have control over some of the building code issues. Somebody's got to follow up. That's the other issue. So, if you identify something and then nobody follows up to see that it was actually corrected and fixed correctly, then it doesn't really do any good. It's if somebody puts a Band-Aid on it and it needed a sling, then it's not going to work so well. So I think the enforcement of this is going to be as important as the code itself and the laws themselves. And the other thing is, we don't want to go, too far. I don't think. Have you, Peter? What are your boards? Have any of your boards? And you may not have been out there much yet. I know it's just starting to get the time when, you're going out and doing some things with boards and annual meetings and things like that. But what kind of things are your associations looking at? In terms of either trying to do things, be proactive, or even be defensive in terms of what they think they're going to push back on, and what are you hearing through some of the lobbying groups that people are pushing back on? Because I know from my perspective, I just worry that if this thing gets too tight, there's just this concept out there, Peter, that people who live in high-rise condominiums, and especially high-rise condominiums near the beach, are wealthy individuals that can afford to spend this money and just don't want to. That for some reason or another, they're they need to be demanded to spend the money because they're just they're wealthy, but they just don't want to part. Which has not been my experience. But what's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think to push back, and again, and this is early because we don't even have the laws yet, but I think there's concern about if they mandate to have full reserves or certain levels of reserves with no opportunity to waive or reduce. And how is that going to be implemented for those associations, for better or for worse, don't have full reserves because they've waived them or they've partially funded them, and they're going to have to go from 0 to 100, and now catch up, or will it be phased in so they can catch up? I think we are going to see, some type of mandatory, whether it's mandatory structural reserves or some sort of minimum amount. So I think there's one concern about, will they be able to afford to do that, to fund, these reserves? And again, I'm not saying that I'm anti-reserves. I'm not, but the reality is you have a lot of associations that, for whatever reason, have either waived or partially funded, and so that could be tough on owners with their assessments going up to make up for that. On the certification side, like I said, I think there's going to be, like I already mentioned, a scramble for engineers. Kind of seen it already in terms of having them lined up to do these inspections for certain cities. and it's coming for the state. So, and that can be, and I think that's necessary. But I think the engineers now, and rightfully so, they're going to be, because engineers have been sued down in Surfside, so they're going to be, I think, pretty cautious in their reports, right?
Yeah.
So as they have to be. I mean, I'm not saying that they shouldn't be. And they also have to, the way these laws are being written, the engineers have to come up with the initial evaluation, and then they have to issue, another report, most likely, that the repairs have been done correctly, on the back end. So I think you're going to, again, there's going to be some caution there because nobody wants to get sued. So all this is going to increase cost. Again, we all want safe buildings.
Right.
That's not, that's obviously a very important goal, is, the important goal. But we'll see how this shakes out in terms of, and I know you've mentioned this several times on the show, are certain people going to be priced out of living in these condominiums because of, the cost of either of the reserves or the cost of doing the repairs, both. And again, at the end of the day, we do want safe buildings, and there is a cost to that. So, where is the happy medium, or is there a happy sweet spot? I don't know. But I think we are going to see some pressures on certain owners on fixed incomes and things like that. They're going to have a hard time now, maybe with financing and loans, and we'll be able to make it through. But I think, again, for certain buildings, certain communities, certain owners, it may be difficult.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's interesting. I think that the when you look at reserves and reserve requirements, we've talked about it, for a long time. The condo side, we've got roof, painting, and pavement, and any item with a life longer than a year and a cost greater than $10,000. We've talked about that, and a lot of times people miss some of that other stuff, that life longer than a year, but the deferred maintenance issue. I had a perfect example of an item that is a deferred maintenance item that should be reserved for, that I have not seen on reserve schedules very often, and that is tinting of a building. If you've got a wood building, and periodically it has to be tinted. To me, that's a reserve expense. That money should be put aside. It's not something that needs to be done every year, but it certainly is an item that has to be done to maintain the property as a maintenance. It's what truly would be called a deferred maintenance item. And yet you don't see some of those things. The other thing that I guess and I may be wrong, Peter, so check me if I'm wrong on this, but my understanding was that under state statute, you actually don't provide. I mean, in the past, we wouldn't have provided for the structural replacement of the building. A lot of this stuff we're talking about, all this spalling and the rebar replacement, typically it was considered to have a life too long and not necessary to reserve for, right? I mean,
very few. Yeah, I was going to mention it. Very few condos have actually reserved for concrete, even though it ends up being the biggest expense. But typically, they're focused more on the roof, painting, paving, park, pool resurfacing, elevators, cooling towers, and interestingly, oftentimes you don't see I won't say replacement of the building, but the concrete restoration, repair restoration frequently is not reserved for.
Yeah, and it wasn't required, right? I mean, that, even though that would be, I don't think it was required under statute.
Well, I don't know. Arguably, you could say it is. I mean, the way the statute is written, as you said, it's painting, parking, paving, no matter what the cost. Roof, painting, paving, no matter what the cost, and anything else that costs more than $10,000 to repair or replace on a deferred basis. And I think maybe the thing with the concrete, it was no one really thought about, because it's not a specific thing, like a roof, like an elevator. It's like, gee, you're right. It's like the building. So could I say it shouldn't have been reserved for? No, I think it probably should have. And it is, the concrete, the balconies, things like that. But I just think it was just not seen as an item per se.
Yeah.
Because almost too big.
Yeah.
Right.
Too big and literally not seen. It was hidden.
Yeah. Right. So, they're looking more at the components and not like at the building as a whole.
Yeah. Those of you out there that had ever heard of the term rebar before you came to Florida and were in a high-rise condominium association, raise your hand, because I think
I thought that was going to the bar twice.
That's
right.
That's right. That's right. That's the rebar. But
The rebar.
on another note, again, and Peter, correct me if I'm wrong, but I've there's a lot of stuff coming out right now that's really making the board at Champlain out to be bad guys, that they were, that they knew the building was going to fall down and they didn't want to spend any money. So they purposely hid stuff and purposely did this and that. And these guys were, we've got to stop these boards. We've got to restrict these boards from doing stuff like that, they're putting people's lives at risk and everything. And, and this is, I guess the reason I'm bringing this up is for those of you out there that are on boards, you have some protection, but you are going to be, board members periodically are, up for attack. So you need to be real careful about doing things correctly. But I guess what I'm getting at here is, I think from what I kind of gathered, the information I've read, and I've tried to read a lot about this, you may know more because you may have some facts directly. But according to what I'm seeing, the board was actually being proactive. They were a couple years in front of their certification requirement. They had already gotten somebody, I think, to look to see what what was needing to be repaired, what was going to have to be fixed and replaced. And and they knew it was going to be way bigger than what they had. So they were looking at how they were going to pay for it, whether they were going to do special assessments or a loan or whatever. And I think they were also trying to prioritize it, try to get an idea of, what items needed to be done first. And yet, they're being made out to be like they knew that this building, they had gotten reports saying the building was going to collapse, and they didn't tell anybody and they just let it fall. It's kind of irritating to me because I do think this was a situation where they were probably being more proactive than a lot of associations. Part of it was because they were being forced to because of the 40-year certification, but part of it was because at least they didn't wait till 40 years and decide, oh yeah, it's 40 years. We better look and see what we need to do. Got to replace.
Yeah, they had actually, they had started their 40-year cert. Okay. And they were, doing it, timely in a sense, because the 40-year cert, I think, was coming up either this year or next.
Yeah.
And they had gotten the report and they were starting to do, I think the roof was
what they're most concerned about.
Actually, I think they had started on the roof. I don't think anyone could have conceived, quite frankly, that the building would fall.
Right.
I haven't read the report personally, the engineering report that seems to be at the center of all this. I personally have not read it. As far as I know, it wasn't like the engineer said, well, you better start shoring up on all your balconies, or you better start
right.
So it wasn't in the sense of, the building's falling down. Because I have seen associations in the past where the engineer comes in and says, these balconies are so bad, you better do it now, and you better put some shoring up because, some of these balconies look like they could fall, literally.
Right.
So again, I'm not involved in the case, it's and I haven't read the report, but I don't think, whether you think the board acted timely, not timely, whatever, I don't think it's a situation where, the building's going to fall, but I don't think it'll fall for another year.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean?
Let's take our shot at it,
So, clearly wasn't that. And you know what? In that building, as far as I know, it's still being studied. I was going to be studied for a long time, you know, by these, you know, by even by the government. I forget the name of the institute that looks
Yeah.
into these things. Anyway, but I mean, as of yet, I mean, it's probably multiple causes coming together in a perfect storm of bad.
Right.
You know, it could be design, could be, you know, the water coming into the garage from the ocean, the spalling, the rebar, this, that. I mean, you know, quite frankly, there's probably multiple things that came
Right.
together. Who knows?
You know,
But
I think that's
but I
probably
don't think the like, you know, can argue all the day. You know, did the board really think the building was going to fall down? I don't think so. I mean,
no.
and just ignored it.
And I think that really, I mean, and there's been a couple articles in the paper here, and most recent one talking about how, you know, how the state or needs to take over these boards and tell them what to do, and you know, kind of, we should be passing these laws to, you know, make these board members have to do all these things. And
Well, no one's going to be on a board then.
no,
You know,
that's what they don't understand. They don't understand, first of all, how much all of this costs, and what, you know, and all of the, and where the people are supposed to get the money. See, that's what it irritates me, is I see this happening in all areas of government, on the tax side, other places. They think because you live in a certain place, or you know, you report a certain thing, that you can afford, that you're rich, that you can do all of this stuff, you know. It's like I said, you know, a lot of these associations, they're 40 years old. 40 years ago, those units were under $100,000. You know, they were well under 100 probably. And people paid them off and owned them free and clear. And it was a different time. You know, it was a completely different time. And you know,
well, I don't think Champlain. Look, I don't think Champlain should be ignored. Okay, I mean, nearly 100 people did
right.
die, and you know, and do we need probably better, you know, oversight in terms of periodic certification, reserve study, engineering reports? Yeah, I do. You know, yes, I do think we do need a degree of something in an effort to try to make sure that this never happens again.
Right.
So now, will the pendulum swing too far and, you know, price people out? I don't know. But again, I do think that, yes, something needs to be done in terms of, you know, trying to ensure, again, that this doesn't happen again. And, you know, as things go, I mean, you know, the laws, you know, something that's in flux, and we'll get legislation passed this year, and then, you know, maybe it'll get tweaked as we go along, as that's how it works.
Yep.
You know, and like I said, you know, typically, you know, pendulum swings back and forth. But again, I'm certainly not opposed to, I'm not opposed to something. And again, it's going to be some kind of, you know, certification program, and the law, actually the proposed law just came out last week, and I was away, so I haven't really had a chance to read it, and I'm a little hesitant, as you know, to talk about laws when they're not passed yet.
Exactly.
I mean, I think it confuses people when they hear on the radio about a law and it's not even, it's just proposed.
Right. Right.
But, and again, I was away. I haven't read it, but yeah, we're going to have a certification program, and it's going to have certain requirements, and you know, we'll talk about it as the session goes through. But you know, where are things going to come to rest? I don't know yet.
Yeah, I think that, you know, and you know, I've said all along, I'm definitely for having unit owners have some control, but they need to be educated or informed. So they need to know, you know, what are we actually looking at? I've said before on here that my problem is people waiving reserves and they have no idea what the number really is, you know. And I think
Yep.
mandatory reserve studies with engineering certification are going to go a long way towards towards solving some of these problems when boards are forced to actually look at the real numbers instead of walking around and saying, well, I think it's going to cost about 10,000.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I agree 100% that, had that engineering law stayed in place, that was there X amount of years ago, who knows? Maybe Champlain never would have happened.
Right.
But don't know. That's pure guess. But I agree that 100% that these boards, and I'll throw myself in the same category. They don't know. I
Right.
mean, they try to figure out the reserves, but you're right. I mean, there's, a lot of it is just, a guesstimate. So I do agree with you that, at least if with some degree of certainty, and it's never 100%, obviously, but some degree through an expert, through an engineer, that will go a long way.
Yeah. And I think, but I am very concerned about overreactions and unintended consequences. For example, are boards going to be forced to use everything that they put in those reserve reports? Well, that would be ludicrous. Everybody knows there's stuff in there that's going to be fixed on an ongoing maintenance basis, and you're not going to reserve for it. The reserve studies I've seen are not over $10,000. They're individual items. They'll put stuff in there for $1,000 or $2,000 or whatever. And so now all of a sudden you've got boards afraid to change the reserve study. And I've told the board the other day, I said, there's nothing wrong with, they had a reserve study from 2018, which was good. I mean, but they were saying, well, there's items on there. And I said, well, you don't have to put every item on. You just have to have an explanation of why you're not. So I always use the pump concept. You got a couple pumps, they're $6,000 a piece. You could consider them the pumps, and then that's $12,000 and you'd reserve for them. Or you can argue that both pumps aren't going to go out at the same time. So they're really $6,000 items, and we'll cover those in regular maintenance. As long as you document that, that used to be the issue with elevators. Remember, the elevators used to have contracts, and the contracts covered, all of the inside of the cab, all the electronics and everything. They didn't include repairs to the shaft and all that kind of stuff. So a lot of boards were not reserving for the full cost of replacement of an elevator, because some of those costs were covered under an operating agreement, under an agreement with the elevator company to maintain them. So I hope they don't, do that. Then you'll have boards, being afraid to leave anything off. But what I'm afraid is going to happen, and I'm pretty sure this is going to be what's going to come. You talked about the reserve specialists. Now, if you're a reserve specialist or an engineer, are you going to want to put your name on this report, right? Well, you're going to be forced to, so you're going to be real conservative. You're probably going to shorten the lives on stuff. You're going to overestimate potentially some of the costs, so you can allow for, maybe having to do things quicker. Even to the point that you may end up with major repairs being only certified through as a replacement through the next required certification date. So if that's every 20 years or whatever, you could look at a situation where people have to reserve for a replacement of all of the rebar and balconies in the building over a 20-year period of time. That would be outrageously expensive. So I could see what I can see being done, Peter, is the reserve specialist specifically restricting the distribution of the report to the association and its members. So you wouldn't have it for other things. You couldn't put it in, potentially put it in the financial statements. You couldn't put it, you couldn't give it to other parties, insurance companies, realtors, all those kind of people. Because they're going to want to limit their liability. And, if anybody can have that report, then they could be sued by anybody, and they're going to want to limit who can sue them probably. So I can see that. I could see us as CPAs And we actually talked about this a little bit this last week. We had our annual audit planning meeting in the firm. And one of the issues with Champlain, because they're looking for people to sue. And there's going to be tons of people that get sued as a result of this. And they're looking for deep pockets. They're looking for liability policies and things like that. I can see us as CPAs, we have a qualification in our report that says we're not engineers. And so any numbers relative that we're required to report those numbers, but we can't give any kind of comfort on them because we're not engineers, and unless there is a study that was done and the engineer is willing to sign off on that, you're never going to get a clean opinion that says that the reserves are adequate. Although one of the proposals that I've heard of in the legislature was they wanted CPAs to sign off on the reserves as being adequate, which
Good idea.
Yeah,
I'm all for that.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Good idea. Let's do that.
I think they should make you sign off on all of them.
Yeah, I'll personally guarantee them. What the heck? I don't have any
whole
money.
State.
Yeah, the whole state.
I think Breckbill needs to sign off on the report for every condo.
I'll do that.
I'll vote for that law.
We talked about at our audit meeting. We talked about not only giving the standard qualification, but if we know if it's come to our attention that they are looking at rebar issues and they are looking at significant structural items, not only qualifying but disclaiming. In other words, saying that the numbers are not, not fairly stated because it ignores this potential huge liability. And then so it could be that because of this issue, you're going to be looking at a lot more qualified opinions or actually disclaimed opinions. It means we give no, or what I refer to as adverse. In other words, we say that they're not adequately stated, that the numbers are not. And when you do that, a lot of times you can't quantify it. There's no way that you can quantify it to kind of just tell people, well, it's just this we're worried about. I mean, you can say what's causing you to give an adverse opinion, but you can't define it. You can't say, well, it's $1 million or it's $10 million or whatever. You just have to indicate that the numbers are, not materially correct. So anyway, I think there's going to be some real, if they're not careful, there's going to be some real unintended consequences on this thing, in terms of what's out there and what's being done. People are going to get real conservative and the information won't be useful, but we'll see. I'm just seeing some of the stuff now and we'll see what happens. But the other thing I was saying is, and I'll just say this for anybody out there, because we got people listening from all over the place, and with the internet and the access that you have to the show over the internet, it's we've got people all over the place. But here in little old Martin County, I've been out, and if you've got a condo association on the beach in Martin County that was built, after or before probably 1985, you probably got some spalling damage. And we even have a bridge here that had some spalling issues. So way faster than it was supposed to have. And so to sit there and think that because you don't have any associations that are working on anything, that they don't have the problem. I mean, again, this article I read just kind of made it that, well, we don't have that problem in Martin County. They did their investigation and they hadn't found any associations. Well, that's because the associations don't know. See, if you go from the pretext that they knew that this building was going to fall down and they were covering it up, kind of their Champlain argument. Yeah, go talk to the people in Martin County. They don't know anything. But when you go from the reality of the situation, which is most of these boards have no idea that how bad the damage is, if they even have any, because they haven't had the building x-rayed. Nobody I know of was doing that. I don't know about you, Peter, but I haven't. Prior to this time, I didn't see any reserve studies that were being done where somebody was X-raying the building in any kind of great detail for spalling issues. They were
No,
using
no,
visuals.
no. I mean, even when they do the exams, rarely do you see them use what's called the ground penetrating radar, which is the GPR, which is the most expensive way. Usually it's more the quote old fashioned unquote examination where they tap.
Yep.
Okay. And they're tapping to hear hollow sounds and things like that. And rarely do I see a building quote get x-rayed or use that that other technique, or even destructive testing, where they whack away parts of it to look. A lot of this is through exterior visible inspection, looking for the spalling, tapping, and then we really don't know until you start cutting, when you start chipping away.
Yeah, that's why the number goes up.
That's when a number almost always goes up.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, I mean, in my X amount of years of doing this, it invariably it's higher than what you estimate.
Yeah.
Sometimes a lot, sometimes not as much. But because it's no one's fault, it's just the nature of the beast.
Yep.
You just don't know until you start going in and trying to find that clean steel.
Yep. That's exactly right. And I'll tell you another thing too, and we talked a little bit about, and we're kind of running out of time, but we're talking a little bit about design issues. And one of the things that people don't consider is things change over the years. And I mentioned, 84, 85. I think that's about the time that they actually developed a concrete that was mixed to have a protection against saltwater erosion. But that didn't come about until about the mid 80s, I think, about the time our bridge was built up here. And so that makes a difference, because some of this concrete was much more porous, and it could depend on the pour that day, what was happening the day that they actually built the building. So, but anyway, we're running out of time. Wanted to thank Marty for calling in, and appreciate him letting people know and about there are the opportunities out there and what's going on. Peter, as always, I appreciate all your information too. I know our listeners really enjoy getting an opportunity to talk to you. Can you give your phone number real quick? We're out of time, I guess. So anyway, we'll do that next week. Get you some phone numbers. Thanks for joining us here on Condo Solutions, WSTU Digital 1450. We're Martin County's Heritage Station.